So it's Hanna Stativka. She will tell you about metaphor. Anna, please. We have planned to also do a demonstration, but we're not going to do it today because everyone is tired, and for this purpose we need a bit more resources. So I hope you forgive us, and you will also have a chance to ask questions. Those joining us online, please post your questions in the chat. And through your questions, by answering your questions, we will do our best to communicate all necessary information. Please, the floor is yours. Hello, colleagues. Thank you so much for being so resilient and last until the very end of our event. My name is Hanna Stativka. I'm a psychologist, psychotherapist, and my key specialization is trauma therapy. And today, at the very end of our conference, I will tell you a little bit about the trauma therapy method I've been using for over 15 years, I guess, and which I suggest to my colleagues, other psychologists. I encourage you to learn it and start using it. Now let's use a little interactive approach. Who of you work with trauma patients? Okay, so who of you are psychology students? Okay, great. So more than half of you are my colleagues. So you are either a practicing psychologist or will soon become a practitioner. Give me the thing, please. Okay. And so let's talk about epistemological metaphor. Initially, I planned it as a workshop, not as a demonstration, but as a practical session where we have a chance to move, etc. But unfortunately, we don't have much time, so we will do it very briefly. But for me, it's important to give you some experience, give you some feeling of what it is and what we are talking about. Epistemological metaphor is a very complicated name no one can pronounce. Everyone's asking what metaphor. So it's actually a method we are going to talk today. So what is epistemology? Who knows? It's a very philosophical science about the knowledge, how we know what we know. It's a philosophical discipline about our knowledge and our learning. Today you will learn more why we call this method this name. And where to press? There? Large button. Okay, now it's work. So in order to help you to wake up, please ask yourself a question. What are your expectations? What would you like to achieve by the end of our session? We don't have much time to ask everyone, but so just ask this question to yourself. What are your expectations? Now, when you ask this question to yourself, it may sound strange for some people. Who feels this question strange? So what would you like to happen at the end of this workshop? It's a strange question, but it's the very first question we normally start working with client as part of this method. What would you like to happen by the end of this session? This question may sound a bit weird because we don't ask what do you want to do, how can I help you, how would you like to address your issue, describe your issue. No, we don't go there in that direction. This question is posed in a way that we already focused on the result as if it has already happened. And so when we put this question this way, what we are doing? We are guiding the client's attention where? Yes, not to a problem. Your client has already described this problem to themselves for many times, because otherwise they would never come to a psychologist. Because when you seek professional support, you already know everything about your problem. But our clients often don't know anything about the results they want to achieve. Based on my experience, I know that sometimes we may spend half an hour or even the whole session to answer this question about expectation, and it's already therapeutic results, especially for traumatized people. Next. I'm sorry, something wrong with equipment again. So I want this clicker to work. Can someone help me, please? Okay. Let's try this one. Okay. So, in order to better understand the logic behind this method, we often start with the history. So, who's the founder, who's the author of this method? Because this method often each method always reflects often reflects the personality of its author, and this method of pure language, this model, which is the foundation of our metaphoric method, was designed by David Grove. David Grove was a very extraordinary individual. He was a psychotherapist, and he was half Maori. We know it's in New Zealand. The Maori are the indigenous population of New Zealand, and he spent his childhood in traditional Maori village. Why it's so important for us? Because Maori culture is totally different from our European rational, logical, left hemispheric culture, where everything is supposed to be organized and clear. We don't know much about this culture. We only know hako, we know tattoos, and maybe we also know a little bit about the art of navigation. Yes. The art of navigation is a bright feature of this culture. And so New Zealand and Polynesia are islands located very far away from each other. And so now tell me please, how to sail from one island to another island located 200, 300, 500 kilometers away without Google Maps, without any maps at all, without any written charts. How would you do it? You use stars, currents, right? Seasons, time of the day, moon, sun, waves, etc. So, in order to navigate in what's going on in the sea, you need to be very present here and now. You need to always be in this loop of feedback with present. You need to know the area, and you need to understand and notice the feedback from your environment and regulate your direction based on this feedback. And well, this metaphoric method works in the following way. We're always in loop of feedback with our client, and we use their verbal and non-verbal responses to guide our direction. We follow the client in a sense. So how did Groove come up with this metaphoric method? He graduated from university and started to work at a clinic where he worked with people suffering from severe post-traumatic symptoms. These were veterans and these were people suffering from what we now call complex PTSD, basically with very negative childhood experience, including incest, physical abuse, etc. And it happened in amidst 90s. During 90s, the main method of working with post-traumatic syndrome was cognitive behavioral therapy, because during 80s our community, as is our community of trauma therapists only started to develop. And so the cognitive behavioral therapists were the first to start dealing with trauma. And what's a key feature of cognitive behavioral therapy? The key method of dealing with trauma there is exposure. A person is supposed to tell a therapist as detailed as possible about traumatic situations that happened to them. Groove diligently used CBT and discovered that his clients didn't always benefit from CBT because veterans are often unwilling to share their experience with civilians, and people with CPTSD who experience these events during their early childhood often developed symptoms even before they could speak. So when your language is not yet developed, you cannot describe what happened to you. You're not able. You don't remember it. You cannot articulate your experience. And so Groove started experiments with various other methods of helping these people, and he just noticed that people often tend to describe the complicated internal experience through metaphors. Like Mr. Yevgen Skripnik, you used a typical traumatic metaphor in his presentation. I'm reading a book, and every next page brings me back to trauma. Who knows, that's metaphor. You're not talking about some specific book, you're just describing your internal experiences. So Groove noticed it and he started experience with how to use this metaphor to help clients, how to develop their metaphors in a helpful way. Okay, and so he discovered that if we work with people's internal metaphors, we can help them even if we don't talk about the contents of an event itself. We can work while avoiding the contents of a specific incident. I will tell you a bit more about how to do it, but now let me tell you that Groove unfortunately died early in the early 2000s, but his method was developed by British psychotherapist Norman Wotton. I once learned the metaphor method from him. He once visited Moscow and Kiev very long time ago. And Penny Tompkins and James Lowley also continued to develop Groove's method in a slightly different direction. They suggested a different method called symbolic modeling. And we have carried out a project with Penny Tompkins for over 3 years together, where they train Ukrainian professionals to use their method free of charge. We have conducted over 30 workshops over these 3 years, and right now we have supervision groups too. You will have my contact details after this presentation, so if you're interested, I will happily invite you to a Facebook group, and if you want, you may watch this webinar. This project is free of charge. Also, we have already published their book in Ukrainian, so this process is ongoing. So, now let's talk a bit about theory behind this method. Metaphor is what? Is a description of an object or process using another object or process. I feel myself as if I'm drowning in a swamp. I feel myself as if there is a wall in front of me and I cannot overcome it. I feel myself as if I have wings behind my back. Have you, from those of you who work with clients, who has heard this kind of metaphoric description of their experience? Okay, so this is a special quality of human brain, special feature of human brain. If I cannot describe some difficult thing, I will usually try to describe it through a metaphor. Metaphor usually carries more information than just an abstract description. I can say I'm angry right now, or I can say I'm angry as if I'm about to explode. It will be a different response, right? Both me and you will have different feelings even at a bodily level. So a metaphor indicates a relationships between its elements. So metaphor is always of systematic nature, because if a person says there is a wall in front of you, what do we have? We have me, we have this wall in front of me, we have some configuration of me and this wall. This wall has size, has a shape, and I have some intention regarding this wall. And we can work with all these elements without going into the content of situation. So unconscious, as we know, does not understand abstract words. It responds to images and symbols. And for each specific feeling, specific experience, each of us has our own individual metaphor consisting of images. There is also a science of cognitive linguistics. This discipline studies how our thinking is our cognition is related to our language. To avoid too much details, there is a general conclusion from cognitive linguistics. In all areas of our life, we define our reality using metaphors, and then we act relying on these metaphors. For example, if I now ask you, what does business mean to you? We will have as many different responses as many people we have in our room. For some people, business is a game. For some, business is a difficult, challenging work. For some, business is scary. For some, business is exciting. Right? So it's obvious then for those who perceive business as difficult work, they will have totally different performance in business than people who perceive business as something fun and game. So any concept can I perceived and interpreted very differently by different people. Research in linguistics show that in routine communication, people tend to use around 6 metaphors per minute. It's true for any language. It happens in any language. So when I facilitate trainings for my colleagues, About these methods, we train to notice this, we practice to notice these metaphors. The very first exercise is to notice these metaphoric expressions. Unfortunately, we don't have time for it today, so it's just a little bit of promotion for you. Of course, metaphors are used not just in our methods, but in many different approaches and models since the very emergence of psychotherapy, scent play therapy, Jungian analysis, drama therapy, psychodrama, gestalt therapy, empty chair technique, when you imagine a person sitting in the empty chair. It's also an internal metaphor. In some methods, a psychologist, a therapist may either suggest some metaphors to a client or use client's own metaphors and suggest some changes to these metaphors, etc. In a method I'm going to describe today, we don't do it. Here, therapist is not doing anything with client's metaphors, and this is actually the purpose of this process. Developing his research groove created a new way of working with metaphors. He called it the clean language. So what does clean mean here? He meant that therapist is not affecting client in any way. A therapist removes own personality, own beliefs and emotions from this process. Why did he do it? Because he noticed that when we work with clients, especially with traumatized people, and basically what the trauma is, it's violence. Trauma is violence. So when a traumatized person comes to a therapist, if a therapist starts to work in an interactive manner, basically to tell a client what to do, what they should do, what they shouldn't do, basically we strengthen this trauma. We show we exercise violence over this person. What do you think? Is it good for recovery? Definitely it isn't. And what's good for recovery? Here, Mr. Victor De Sinker showed an exciting presentation about mice. And after these poor mice were tortured, they were sent to this mice paradise where they could run around, etc. And why this environmental enrichment was beneficial for traumatized minds? Because there is no violence, no prohibitions. They are free to move and to do what they want to do here and now, to explore the space in any way they want. So as part of this method, we let our client to freely explore their inner environment without telling them what to do. This mere thing itself already has a therapeutic effect, because based on my experience, I often notice situations that where client comes to me and I just ask a question to client and normalize their metaphors without judgment. I just let them freely develop their metaphors. Often clients receive this unique experience where they are not told that they are wrong or broken. They are not told what to do. Moreover, traumatized people often tend to abuse themselves because a traumatized person is someone who needs extra effort to live. They say to themselves, stick all your worries somewhere far away. I'm wrong. I must be normal. I need to wear this mask, etc. because people exposed to violence start to internalize this violence and abuse. And in order, so they start to control themselves, they lose trust in themselves. And so when we're not doing anything like this and we just help person in a calm and neutral manner to develop their own metaphor, a person learns to trust themselves. A person develops a feeling that they're okay. And it's actually a half of the therapeutic effect we need when working with traumatized people. Now let's move on. The more client explains, interprets, delivers and gives concept about their own personal story, emotions, and experiences, the less the efficiency of therapy is, especially trauma therapy, because client is forced to rely on their internal worldview and extrapolate their internal worldview outside for therapists to understand. Some therapist receives client with an issue and therapist says, no, before we start working on your issue, we need to first process all your childhood trauma. Have you ever seen therapists like this? Everyone did. So, the client is not here to work with childhood trauma. The client is here to address some current issue from present. So, when a client doesn't need to explain to therapist what's going on to them, and we often struggle to explain it, we often cannot explain it even to ourselves, not to mention a therapist. So what to do next? Here, I'm not going to read this text. You have a chance to read it on my slide because everyone is tired now. But the key idea of all this slide is that therapist meta position, who's working with a client as part of this method, is that a client has enough resources, strengths, and everything to cope. Because if I, as a therapist, believe in it, then the client will feel it. And this is another very important point we need to achieve as part of trauma therapy. We need to bring agency back to a client. The more I believe in client's capacity, the better the progress of the therapy is. And why do I believe that the client can cope with it? Because at least the client has survived up to this session. It's a fact. So this person has enough capacity, enough resource to meet us. So what are some benefits of the clean language? First, as I've already mentioned, we can work while avoiding the content of incidents. Some, as well known, Katerina Leonidovna Milutina once mentioned there are two types of traumatized clients, those who are willing to talk and those who are not willing to talk. If a client is not willing to talk about their experience, about their situation, then we can work without content. We can just work with metaphors. For example, I have a client who works at the National Security Service. Once in 6 months, he comes to me and says, "Hi, I need to recover my human shape. I don't know anything about him. I know only his pseudonym. He cannot tell anything about himself. He doesn't tell me anything about himself. We just recover his human shape." How we are doing it? When you want to recover your human shape, how do you first find out that you are not in a human shape? Epistemology, how do you know that? He says, I feel like I have a black hole here in my chest. What kind of hole? What's this color? What's the size? Etc. So we just develop this metaphor and move on. Then, no interpretation or judgment must be exercised by a therapist. We do not interpret any client's metaphors. We just accept them the way they are. Then it's a short-term therapy. Basically, in order to help a client to reach their purpose, often 2, 3, or 5 sessions are enough. Then it's a very good method to deal with complicated, confusing problems, internal conflicts, something the client may know, something that lingers for many years, etc. Then it's a systematic method. So we work with the metaphor as a system. Therapist uses only those information and language which are provided by a client. Therapist does not rephrase anything, does not interpret anything, does not analyze anything. We just repeat what the client is saying. And another important point, which is missing in this slide, this method, from my experience and from my experience of my colleagues, this method is very helpful to deal with the therapist burnout. Because one thing is when I have 5 clients per day, I'm listening to 5 tragic stories, and then I will eventually develop secondary trauma, vicarious trauma, because my nervous system will empathically respond to my client's nervous system. So if 5 times a day I listen about stories about fences, walls, swamps, skies, suns, etc., my nervous system will not be actively engaged. I don't know what the person is talking about, I don't need to know it. And it helps me to protect myself as a therapist. For those who work with military personnel now, for those who work with losses, we all work with complicated issues, and European therapists are shocked. They don't understand how we're doing it. You endanger yourself, and you keep working with the clients. How could you do it? So it's really important for us to use methods that help us to protect ourselves, because we are the only ones here to help these people. We need to take care of ourselves. This is a very simple description of this clean language. Clean language is about questions, just a set of simple language. You see the first purple questions are something we start with. What would you like to happen next? I want to be happy. How do you know that you are unhappy now? How do I know? I feel pressure here in my stomach. Usually when we ask this question to our client, how do you know, this epistemological question, how do you know what you know, what do we receive? We either receive a metaphor or unpleasant bodily sensation. If a client mentions unpleasant bodily sensation, we have the next question. Where do you feel this pressure? Inside or outside? What's the color of this pressure? What's the size of this pressure? What's the shape of this pressure? And then what do we do next? A client says, it's black. It's round, something round, and it's made of metal. So what do we do next? We translate this unpleasant bodily sensation from kinesthetic language to visual language. And in this, we offer a client to see this feeling in front of them, to dissociate from it. What do you think? What happens when we take an unpleasant bodily sensation, translate it into a visual image and dissociate? What happens? We feel relief. Yes, our body will relax, we will feel relieved. As soon as our body relaxes, what happens? When our body relaxes, what happens? Sympathetic nervous system calms down and parasympathetic nervous system starts to self-regulate, and what happens to a metaphor we have brought in front of us after body relaxes? This metaphor changes spontaneously. And this is actually the very essence of this method. Then we reiterate the same thing again. What do you feel when you look at it? So we imagine this black metal hole from your stomach. I don't like it. I feel unpleasant sensation there in my shoulders. What's the shape of it? What's the color of it? So we do the same thing, we reiterate the same thing throughout the whole session. So what happens next? Next, all these images start to transform, and at some point they either turn pleasant, for example a pleasant landscape, or they just disappear. Why does it happen? That's something inherent to human mentality. Our mind knows what to do. So what do clean language questions do? They respect and validate the client's experience. We do not contaminate the client's experience with some smart theories and ideas of therapists. Ensure efficient communication with the client's unconsciousness. We reduce resistance, etc. Basic protocol, we are not going to focus too much on it. We study basic protocols during our trainings. I'm actually the one facilitating these trainings. The next is about to happen in November. You will have my contact details in a mail out after this presentation. Please come, I will be happy to welcome you. And you will also have access to my slides. All of you will receive my slides. You may not take pictures, you will receive the slides. You don't need to take pictures. So a therapist using these methods needs certain skills. There is not anything special about the skills. These are skills needed to any trauma therapist, especially now. Grounding, containing, being a stable object, no judgment, and ability to follow the current, follow the stream, notice verbal and non-verbal responses by our client. So, since we have a scientific conference here, let me share with you the results of our research. Me and my company, I'm a co-founder of VM company, a training company. So with this company we did focus group interviews. We decided to research the efficiency of this method because unfortunately we don't have sufficient evidence base. We need to do these studies. So we did online focus group interviews. Let me emphasize that it's not quantitative research, it's a qualitative research. It's the very first step to better understand what's going on when therapists are using this method. So we had 3 focus group interviews with 27 psychologists using this method. Some of them have used it for several months, some of them have used it for several years, and these are our conclusions, general conclusions. Psychotherapists have started to use the method of epistemological metaphor for various reasons, but they all united by a desire to find softer, safer, and more efficient way of working with clients experiencing difficult emotions and difficult situations. Focus group participants describe the experience as helpful, while more experienced participants notice consistent benefit from using this method in their practice. So psychologists observe sustainable progress in their clients. Participants mostly positively assess the efficiency of the methods. Moreover, no method, of course, there is no one size fit for all methods. Some methods work for some clients, some methods don't work for some clients. So, of course, every method has own limitations. It doesn't work for some people because, for example, this person is not prone to think in metaphors. We are all like different and unique. Some people prefer more structured approaches. So our participants believe that the method is an efficient tool for working with various mental health issues, including panic attacks, including confirmed PTSD, including depression, and is especially efficient in situations when clients struggle to formulate and express their thoughts and feelings. There is a condition called alexithymia. It's very typical for for males who have been never taught to express their emotions. I once served as a military psychologist for 2 years in the armed forces of Ukraine, and I've had experience of working with males. And based on my experience, when we start working, these people who struggle to describe their sensations, emotions, and feeling perfectly work with metaphors. It works excellently for them. They cannot say, I'm angry. They can say, I have fire in my chest. Then participants also notice that this method is helpful for clients to deeper explore their emotions, traumas, etc. It works good in it works good with psychosomatic issues. We know that now it happens often. This method is efficient to process fresh trauma and crisis conditions. And works good when a client doesn't have any structured request. For example, a person comes to you and says, I don't know what I want, but I want something to change. And and in these focus groups, this one of the focus groups included a military psychologist who uses this method with military servicemen before combat deployment and immediately after the combat deployment. So he works right there. And so we asked him, how did you explain this method to guys? He says, hey guys, come here, we are now about to clean your flash card, your flash drive. So strengths and benefits of this method, once again based on experience of those who are using it. It's fast. It doesn't require you to listen traumatic experience of your clients. You may quickly normalize their condition. It's efficient with all trauma, even if a person doesn't remember the exact incident. Based on my experience, even if a traumatic incident happened when a person was 3 to 5 years old, this method is still efficient. It's a soft and safe approach, and it's multi-purpose. Yeah. So it can be used with various issues ranging from childhood trauma to coaching requests. I want to get rid of a fear of public speech, or I want to better understand how to develop my business. Limitation of this method. Some limitations were also mentioned by participants. I need to prepare a client. Sometimes we may need to stabilize the client before using this method, but of course every model requires prior stabilization, and also we need to explain to a client what we're going to do. This method is not always suitable for people who prefer more structured and logical therapy approaches. Some focus group participants mentioned that this method was a bit difficult for some clients, especially for those who didn't have good contact with their body. What do you feel? I don't know. Where do you feel your anger? I don't know. But at the same time, for this kind of clients with some dissociative symptoms, this method is helpful to actually come in contact with their body, because when a person says, I don't know, we still may use our questions to softly, gently help this person to better feel their bodies. We also know that when dealing with trauma, it's all very body, the working with body is very important. Without body-oriented work, without introspection, our therapy won't be really efficient. Then another point is that some clients believe that the problems have resolved themselves spontaneously. I went to some lady psychologist, showed me some cartoons. We watched these cartoons, and then my panic attacks just resolved themselves. Well, okay. This is a common joke. It's a very good therapy model, but not that good business model. It's too quick. Well, that's it. Most participants recommend this method to their colleagues, especially for working with crisis and traumatic conditions. In general, the method is positively assessed as a rapid and efficient way of work. And it's not mentioned on the slide, but it's really important for me to highlight the following. When we use this method, we do not re-traumatize our client, because our client mind will not let this person to go somewhere they're not ready to go. It will just not let them. And for me, it's very important, because it means that this method is quite safe for our clients. As here I will wrap up my presentation. Thank you so much for your attention.